My name's Charan, and I just want to say good evening to everybody and welcome. We're so happy that you're here with us tonight. And if it's your first time at a Somerville Museum event, I'd like to offer you a special welcome. The mission of the museum is to be the city's mirror, reflecting its past and its present. So if you're watching through the Somerville Media Center or Somerville City Cable or here tonight, welcome to all of you, and thank you for taking the time to be with us. Tonight's panel is called Voices from Somerville's Salvadoran Community, and the event is part of a Somerville Museum Zoom series called Voices from Somerville, History and Culture, and it's made possible in part by Mass Humanities. And this whole series is also made possible by the Massachusetts Cultural Council and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And I'd also like to thank Erlene Tenise, Ada Maria Santos, Adriana Fernandez, and Jenny Sanserine for their help and encouragement in producing this series. And just so you know, our next event is Voices from Somerville's Nepali community in 3 weeks on June 9th. So tonight we're going to hear from 4 members of the local Salvadoran community, talk about their work, tell their stories, and share their experiences in Somerville's neighborhoods. And then we'll listen to a historian from Somerville discuss connections between El Salvador and the United States. And following that, we'll have time for questions. I would like to give many thanks to artist, educator, and linguist Gabrielle Sosa. Gabrielle is providing a live translation of this event in Spanish, so you can just push the button and choose Spanish if you would like to hear a translation of this event in Spanish. So I'd like to introduce the first person in our panel, and he can't stay for the whole event tonight, so we're really excited that he can be here. Born in San Salvador, Mario Quiroz is a social documentary photographer. Since 2012, his work has been exhibited widely, including at the Museum of the Americas in Washington, D.C., and the National Museum of Anthropology in San Salvador, and at the Somerville Library. As an artist, he believes in working through partnerships, and he's partnered with many area nonprofits, including the Mira Coalition and the Massachusetts Alliance of Portuguese Speakers. And he's also worked on photography projects with students in Somerville. So thank you so much, Mario, and welcome.
Well, thank you. And since I am the first speaker of the evening, well, hello to everybody. Buenas noches a todo el mundo. And so what we're going to do in the next couple of minutes, it's going to be more of a conversation. It's really strange to do this and be a Zoom and screen. Normally, when you're in person, you have more room for your arms to move and talk with your body. But right now, we're going to try to behave and stay within the little square, but still try to communicate the message. Well, the main idea for tonight's presentation is to be mindful or to remember that Somerville history and Somerville stories are basically the same over and over and over. The only thing that changed or that has changed over the years has been the name and last names of the characters, the nationalities of the characters, but the plots and the challenges and the things to overcome have been and probably have been the same for Italians, Irish, um, Salvadorians, Brazilians, and who knows who the newcomers will be in 20, 30, 50 years. But the core identity of the city, the core identity of Somerville is that it is a place that most of the time welcome newcomers. And when they don't, um, there's an already built identity in the community, like in the people, to keep doing it. So we're gonna do 2 things. We're gonna watch because I'm a photographer, right? So we're meant to see or to look at pictures. We're gonna watch 2 things. The first one is a project that is called Somerville Gentrification, and it's going back to the idea that it's a problem or a challenge that is happening not just Salvadorians, but you know everybody living in the city. And the flavor is, or if anything, the question behind the photo essay is So how do you handle gentrification? Because you cannot stop progress, yet you cannot leave people out of it just for the sake of profit. And since I am doing things from the artistic point of view, I don't have to answer the question. Yay! It's a moral challenge for somebody else, not for me. But at least I can bring up the points, and you'll see it through the photograph. So yes, Allison, if we can just play the first one.
I just want to make sure everybody can see my screen right now.
Yes.
And
I
okay,
think so.
great.
What started as hope has ended, wrapped in a black veil and the cold gaze from the pavement. What love song should we sing in our minds when the music has ended? For how long can family togetherness be kept safe inside these fences? How can a symbol fly high when there's no wind nor a strong arm to hold it? The entitlement of multi-generations cannot shield the fact that the time is banging at his door. Even the bones from family tales will be gone. There will be no one to remember them. When an ugly house is bought, the same four walls will stay. People will be gone. Will today's first graders still be around to graduate from the new high school? The cacophony from the assembly line is quiet now. The wireless grandkid can't hear them. The soil that emerges from the earth is the same for planting or burying. When mom and pop go to sleep, their store will close. Polly, Tito, and Raj will be street names.
Thanks, Allison. It's very shocking. Maybe 2 weeks ago, we went to Assembly Road. Now that people can go out a little bit more, and some of these photographs were taken there about 2 summers ago, and there will be 19. And many of the things that I photographed, I couldn't recognize them. So the landscape has changed. Or there was a picture of behind a high school, where it was still in construction. It's like, that's totally different now. And the question is, in the slide for the high school, so what's going to happen? Will the first graders, like today's first grader, are they going to be still around to graduate from the new high school? And that question itself, it's a Pandora box about social injustice, inequality, endless things. So, as I said before, I'm very happy to, put up the questions, and even happier that I know how to answer them myself. But yes, and I think that in that sense, that's the power of that the art brings. That you can start conversations, and you can use photography or art. It's one of my favorite things to say is that where you cannot go through the main door, you can go through a window with art, because it's a different way to get there. And all right, so we're gonna do the second video. Alison, if you can play it. And just, this is fresh, like I finished it around 1 p.m. today, so it's really new. Thank you.
Love Poem by Romero. Those men who widened the Panama Canal and were paid from the silver roll instead of the gold roll, who rebuilt the Pacific Fleet at bases in California, who rotted in jails in Guatemala, Mexico, Honduras, Nicaragua, for being thieves, smugglers, scam artists, for being hungry, those always under suspicion. I hereby present this individual suspected of vagrancy with the aggravating circumstance of being Salvadoran. Those women who fill the bars and bordellos of all the ports and capitals in the region. The Blue Grotto, the Panties, Happy Land. Those farmers who grow corn in foreign jungles. Those kings of the crime page, those who nobody ever knows where they're from, who were the best craftsmen in the world, who were gunned down crossing the border, who died of malaria or the sting of a scorpion or a viper bite in the inferno of the banana plantations, who cried drunkenly to the national anthem under a Pacific cyclone or a northern snowstorm. The scroungers, the beggars, the potheads. The Salvadoran guanaco sons of bitches. Those who barely managed to return, who had a bit more luck. The eternally undocumented. The do-it-alls, sell-it-alls, eat-it-alls. The first to draw their blades. The saddest sad people in the world, my compatriots, my brothers and sisters.
Thanks, Alison. So how do you define what does it mean to be Salvadorian? I think Roque Dalton did it very well. And just the idea to name that poem, Poema de Amor, a love poem, because to be Salvadorian is to be it's an act of love. It's an act of love, of going forward despite everything, despite earthquakes, despite inequalities, despite civil war, despite gangs and maras and really bad jokes. I mean, it requires a lot. Yet, as Salvadorians, there's this unlimited faith that something is going to happen, that eventually the day will turn and something better will come. And I think, because I know my time is about to end, but just to close with the idea that if you are next to it, or if you know a Salvadoran, the very best thing that they will share with you is that no matter what, at the end there will be a smile. Because it's that idea or that identity of being the grandchildren of earthquakes, that things, earth shakes, things falls down, yet once it's over, you start to rebuild and life goes on. And that was my presentation. Thank you.
Mario, thank you so much for sharing both of those videos with us. And the poem was just such a wonderful way to start this event. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So next we're going to hear from Kenia Alfaro. Kenia is the Director of Parental Engagement and Education Policy at the Welcome Project, which is in Somerville. The Welcome Project is a nonprofit organization that works to build the collective power of immigrants through education and advocacy. Welcome, Kenia. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here and for the Somerville Museum for making space for stories that are often left silenced and often not shared in public spaces. Like Charan said, my name is Kenia Alfaro. I'm the Director of Parental Engagement at the Welcome Project. Both of my parents are Salvadorian immigrants that came to the US during the Civil War in the late 80s. And so I'm a first generation born in the US, Salvadorian American. I don't usually say Salvadoran American. I usually say I'm a Salvadoran or a daughter of Salvadoran immigrants. That's how I identify. And thank you, Mario, for starting off that way. What I will share with you today is, and what I hope what you leave with today is really the wide variety and range of Salvadorian lives and histories, and the fact that we are unique, we're the same, but also very different. And our stories are very different as well. Every single person has a different story to share. I have been in the city of Somerville for 5 years now and working with immigrant families through the Welcome Project. I'm primarily Salvadorian communities, just because I am Salvadorian, also my native language is Spanish, and so I spend a lot of time doing that. My main work is with parents and helping them understand the US educational system and really the nuances of what it means for a child to be in the public US education system. And a lot of that is drawn from my own personal experience. My mother was undocumented until I was in middle school. And so we kind of understood the struggles of not wanting to go to a clinic, not wanting to go get food, not wanting to do a lot of things because of her undocumented status. I would say thankfully she received TPS, but there are also a lot of nuances with temporary protected status, and both iterations of it that have come since the Civil War, but since the earthquakes as well in El Salvador. And so, you know, I've lived with that perspective in mind that we have been a small fortunate, thanks to my mother and TPS, that have been able to gain a lot of different resources. And a lot of the work that I do with parents here is also based on my own experiences of what does it mean to grow up as a daughter of Salvadoran immigrants, and trying to keep that identity and trying to understand what that identity is. When I was in high school, my father was deported back to El Salvador. And so I understand some of those situations and difficulty of having a transnational family and what does it mean for a father or family members to still be in El Salvador, and having kids in the US and trying to be raised in the US, trying to learn the language and trying to keep the other language as well. And I see it a lot with parents often having conversations with me about, well, how do I help my child keep our language and our culture, right? A lot of parents find it difficult to do so once they come to the US, but also a lot of families here in Somerville. If they're maybe not in one of the lucky few to be in the Unidos program in East Somerville, they worry about their children keeping that Spanish. And they worry about their children being influenced by the American culture and not liking the food. Just yesterday, I was talking to a mom who was saying how picky her son is about eating pupusas, which are so popularly known, right? They're like our main dish. And she was so shocked that her son was being so picky with eating something that's so central and so special to our country. And so I help parents navigate through the system, but also they help me really ground myself and understand some of those different things in my culture maybe that I don't know about or I don't think about as well. And so I mainly share this to give perspective, right? To give of what I've been through here in the US, of the different ways that I've also learned how to navigate these spaces, which haven't been difficult. And I think oftentimes folks maybe have an idea that because Somerville is so openly out there and saying things about immigrants that maybe our communities don't have struggles, and they're not dealing with different traumas, or they're not dealing with different insecurities, whether it be food or housing or racism, whatever it might be. But that's still happening. Like Mario said, it might look maybe a little bit different, but from generation to generation, at least here in Somerville, from what I hear from families, a lot of that is what we're hearing. My background prior to just working in Somerville has been in trauma-informed care. And so a lot of the work then that I do through the Welcome Project and now through our English classes is really helping families process their trauma, intergenerational trauma. I think a lot of folks, think, well, the Civil War was in the late 80s and 90s and came to finish. Well, the trauma was for that generation. But there's so much intergenerational trauma that has come, and that a lot of people my age, even the younger kids, are still experiencing, and our country is still experiencing. And so I really try to work with families, and I try to work with myself, right, and trying to understand that history and why it's important for me to understand it in the work that I do, and for me personally to understand my own growth and my own understanding of the culture and the country that I didn't grow up in, but I still keep in contact with. And so that is a little bit of me. I don't want to take up a lot of time, but just kind of giving you a perspective of someone who's different, maybe a younger generation who's in the US, and kind of some of the things that we are thinking through and also just trying to work through as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenia. And I already have some questions, so hopefully we'll talk more in the question and answer section. But now we'll move on and we'll hear from Pastor Morales. Luis Morales is a business leader and pastor originally from El Salvador, and he founded many popular local businesses, including Amigos Market and Taco Loco. Those are located in Somerville. Today, he is pastor. He leads Vida Real Church with locations in Somerville and Medford. And he also operates a charitable foundation that has delivered food and medical supplies across Central America. And his sermons are broadcast internationally. Welcome, Pastor Morales. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity. Well, I was born in El Salvador. I came to the US when I was 17, and I came straight to Somerville. The only people I knew in the US was a family from the city of Somerville. And my life, when we talk about trauma, I was traumatized because, I mean, every day when we used to go to school, at least we would see 3 dead people on our way to school and jump over dead people. So that was normal in our days in El Salvador. So I came here and I was very concerned about what I went through. And I wanted to help people that had gone through similar experiences. So I started going to school here. I earned 3 master's degrees, one in theology, one in mental health, and one in marriage and family therapy. Then I became a pastor of Vida Real Church in Somerville. Now we moved to Medford because Somerville is not like a friendly city for churches, but we bought 2 pieces of property in Medford, and that's where we're working. That's where we're working right now. The church is about 1,000 members, but since I became a pastor, we have opened churches in different countries. We have like 40 churches in different parts of the world, including Madrid, Spain, and other states of the United States. Like right now, I'm starting one in Salt Lake City. That's where I am right now. And, I, when I went through the war, I also was able to witness how poverty was so tough on a lot of people in El Salvador. So since I came here, I became like very interested in helping the needy. I started a nonprofit called Hearts of Life. We fed people in Tijuana, the caravans that have been coming to the US. I've sent containers of food there the Indians in the Tarahumara region in Mexico, the refugees in Jordan, different parts of the world. And we deliver construction materials to Central America to build houses for the needy, Wonder Board and stuff like that. And well, I have managed to, grow on what I do. So my sermons have been considered like good quality sermons. And I'm going to 110 countries in Latin America right now, every single week, 5 times a week, through Enlace is the name of the Spanish channel, through Trinity Broadcasting in Dallas. And lately, well, through the pandemic, we've been feeding we've been giving away, we've gone down to 500 cases a week right now of food to the needy, but we were able to do 5,000 a week during the pandemic. And right now we're starting a project in El Salvador that has to do with recycling plastic. The way we're killing our environment, for me, it makes me sad every single day how we're so irresponsible. So I'm trying to do my share. We found donors that are helping us create this project. We managed to purchase the very, very big warehouse in El Salvador. As a matter of fact, 4 days ago, the machines arrived in El Salvador. So we're going to take plastic, we're going to grind it. We're going to melt that plastic and turn it into Lego blocks to build houses for the needy. We're going to have a capacity of building 1,600 houses a year for now. There is a city in El Salvador called Metapan. The mayor is partnering with us to be able to achieve even more, probably acquire more equipment to double the capacity. And we're finding a lot of people that are so interested in engaging in this type of activities. And I got people from Korea that are helping us, not financially, but sending missionaries to work there. And one of the ideas we have is to go to the universities and tap into all of those kids that are so concerned about the environment. And that way we can take them there and have them, help us for a month or so. And it's a nonprofit project. So the cheaper the production of a house, the more people we're going to be able to help. But we got people interested from different parts of the world when they've heard that of what we're doing. We have a gentleman out of Colombia who is advising us on everything we're doing right now. He's the one who owns the formula on how to do all of this. So I continue to grow, to learn more, to help. The more you grow, the more connections you get, and the more connections you get, the more people you're able to help. There is so many things we do. We started a business in Somerville, Taco Loco. It's an icon in Somerville. They just demolished the building where the original restaurant had been. We started on 44 Broadway. Now we've moved to 46, and we plan to keep growing as a family with more restaurants. And my family, they do the business part, and I do the spiritual part. We have a lot of friends in different parts of the world that we help. Right now, we're working in helping Syrian refugees in Lebanon. I was just in Lebanon 3 weeks ago. So I wear so many hats, and I don't want to get you tired with so many things. But that's a little bit of what I'm doing and what I've been able to achieve. And it's an honor to be, someone who started in Somerville. But the fact that Somerville has become a very not a friendly city for churches. You know, this whole operation that I'm doing started in Somerville, and now we have moved it to Medford because of the way things have been in the area. We're on 404 Broadway in Somerville, right next to the synagogue there. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Pastor Morales. It's always incredible over the years to hear these different projects that you're doing to help so many people. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And next we're going to hear from Irma Flores. Since 2013, Irma has been a community engagement specialist and Spanish liaison with the city of Somerville, and she works with residents across the city. And Irma studied international relations at the University of El Salvador. Welcome, Irma. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. And I'm blessed to be on this exceptional panel. I think we as Salvadorians has been doing a really good job in the city, right? I feel lucky to be here. And as Charan mentioned, my name is Irma Flores. I am an immigrant myself, an immigrant from El Salvador, and the community engagement specialist and Spanish liaison for the Office of Immigrants Affairs in Somerville. I came to this country 20 years ago with my two children. We escaped from the destructive earthquakes in El Salvador in 2001. I was trying to find the psychological and emotional stability that my children deserve after that disaster. And that event defined the rest of our life. We just celebrate the 20 years on May 9 in this country. So it was emotional. They tried to not to remember because it was pretty hard for us to leave El Salvador. So I'm one of the 325,000 people who are on the temporary protected status. And TPS is an important humanitarian protection for people in the United States, people like me. And I have been really vocal trying to get the awareness about TPS and how the last administration give us really hard time with TPS. So right now our situation is uncertainly. The Biden administration didn't say anything. They want to pass a integral immigration reform, which we know there is not the voluntary, the political willingness to do this immigration reform. So we'll see. Our work permits expire on October 4th. So that is, we'll see what happens. This next 4 months are crucial for TPS, for DACA, and the farmers workers as well. As I mentioned, this protection allows immigrants like me to have a work authorization card and contribute to the United States economy, society, and culture. As a new immigrant in this country 20 years ago, I could not properly communicate with my children's teachers or understand the school system properly. This conflict helped me grow my passion for assisting the community in every possible way. So to get involved in the school system, I had to learn about and committed to help immigrants' families who were having difficult participation in their child's education, which led me to become a community organizer. During my work as a community organizer, I had the opportunity to organize a group of parents in East Boston committed to their children's education. One of the significant, I'm here. I'm so sorry. I have been, my internet had been unstable, so I was scared. But I'm here. So sorry. So one of the significant campaigns was to ask the Boston Public Schools Committee to approve the family engagement coordinators positions for Boston Public Schools. which will allow parents at that time to learn about the school system and how participate and engage in their child's education. We received the 35 family engagement coordinator's position at that time. And that just confirmed me that we could achieve success in this country when we are organized and we have the right tools and the right information. I have been working with the immigrant community for almost 10 years as a community organizer. And in 2013, as I mentioned before, I assumed the role of the community engagement specialist and Spanish liaison for the city of Somerville. The use of community organizing tools in popular education has been helping me to build partnership within the immigrants communities. And I'm responsible for making all city services and programs accessible in Spanish through multicultural competency, translation, interpretation, and community involvement. My direct experience with immigration processes, including government and school systems, allow me to understand better the challenge faced by immigrants dealing with institutions. I went through that. I know how hard it is. And I'm currently working as a member of the immigrant service units. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I have been assisting Spanish speaker families, residents that were affected for COVID and referring them to city and community services like food and rental assistance, basic needs, medical assistance, COVID tests, unemployment benefits, and funeral economic assistance. Providing information about COVID-19, resources, emergency status, vaccine sites, etc. To the Spanish-speaking families via the resources web, radio, TV, bulletin board, social media, churches, and newspaper. Actually, I'm producing a radio show we have this wonderful partnership with Radio Jornalera. So we have this Nexus Somerville, and it's basically to bring information for Spanish speaker residents about city and community services, which I feel really proud. It is a lot of work, but I really enjoy the way people is connecting and getting that information about resources. So as you can see in my position as a community liaison, I have had the privilege to serve the immigrant community in many areas, facilitating access to city services, advocating and supporting immigrants as they integrate in their new communities. But more important is I think everyone has something to contribute to, in this case, in Somerville specifically. But what every one of you have been listening from the previous panelists is we have something to give to our communities. And that is why I think that is immigrants, we have to be welcoming in this. And I think we are lucky. Somerville has been a welcoming city for a long time, but I think we have a lot of work to do in the nearest areas as well. So my message is we have been providing some contribution to our community, and that I think that needs to be recognized, not because of me. I'm more like we have to recognize those families who, it's hard every morning to get up and go to work. We always trying to recognize people who have success, but I would like to have this kind of event for simple people who is just really having difficult time adapting in the system in a new country. They don't know the language. So I think if we can be a little bit more compassionate and just try to raise those people who have been, because being an immigrant in this country is not easy. I can tell you, it's not easy at all. But I have the opportunity to grow. But some people, they don't have that opportunity. So how we can bring them to us and just make them feel important and they are doing some contribution. So that is what I have, and I want to share. I'm really passionate about the immigrant rights, and I will try to continue doing the job I have been doing, because I know how hard it is, and that is my commitment to support the community. But I don't want to give them assistencialism. I think we need to provide the tools for them to get ready and integrate in the community. Thank you.
Irma, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for your passion and for all you do for so many. It's an honor to have you here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
And last tonight, we're going to hear from Dan Breen. Dan is a history professor and a legal scholar and a Somerville resident, and he's a professor at Brandeis University. He's the winner of the 2017 Louis Dembus Brandeis Prize for Excellence in Teaching. Dan, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you to you, and thank you to everybody else on the panel. It's really an honor to join you this evening. I did win that teaching award in 2017, but that was before they taught us about sharing the screen. And for me, this is kind of like the Mars rover mission every time I try this. So let me give it a shot. Let's see if everything is okay. It looks like that worked. So what I'd like to do is just share a few words with you about the very often tragic history of El Salvador as it relates to the United States. And I hope in doing so, I can throw into some relief what the panelists have talked about in regard to the Salvadoran experience, especially that resilience and that unlimited faith, as Mario put it, that characterizes the Salvadoran people and the Salvadoran community in the United States. So I'll go to slideshow, we'll go here, all goes well, and we'll begin. So maybe in the interest of time, I'll start here with the Salvadoran flag, because that flag tells a little bit of a story. The relationship of the United States and El Salvador, in all its difficult aspects, could have a lot of beginning points, but I think a suitable beginning point for us tonight might be the beginning of the Great Depression, which of course was triggered by the Wall Street crash of 1929. Now, at that time, by the 20s and the early 30s, most of the productive land in El Salvador was owned by a very small group of elite families. And in El Salvadoran tradition, they're often referred to as the 14 families. And although traditionally, El Salvador produced a wide variety of crops, including indigo, which is the reason the blue appears here on the El Salvadoran flag, as well as cotton and many different foodstuffs, those 14 families, the elite that controlled much of the good land, had every interest in making sure that the people who lived on that land, who didn't own it, they were tenants, produced coffee, predominantly coffee, because that was the great export earner for those families. And all went well for them for many years producing coffee. They tended to make a lot of money, but the people who lived on the land were shut out from those riches. And then came the stock market crash of 1929. And when that happened, the world market in coffee became deeply depressed. Coffee prices plummeted all over the world. What were these elite families to do now that their exports were not earning as much money as they had before? And unfortunately, what they did was they slashed wages of the people who were working on their land to the breaking point. And in this, they were completely supported by this man here. He's a dictator of El Salvador in the early 1930s. That's Maximiliano Hernandez Martinez. So not only did they slash wages, but they also ruinously continued to produce more coffee, hoping to somehow earn more money that way. But of course, that was counterproductive. The price just kept going down. And eventually, by 1932, many of the people of El Salvador, especially in Western El Salvador, couldn't take it anymore. And they began to rise up against their landlords who were slashing wages this way and have been oppressing them for so many years. And the government of El Salvador acted very quickly to crack down on that unrest. So in January of 1932, they launched acts of vicious oppression, which all El Salvadorans remember as La Matanza, that is the massacre. And we think as many as 30,000 people, many of them people indigenous, the people community, the indigenous community of Western El Salvador, were slaughtered in La Matanza. And they were slaughtered over the course of just a few days. In some places, anybody over the age of 12, if they were male, were simply killed, their bodies put in open trenches where they were just left for days and weeks on end. Sometimes they disappeared completely. And by the end of January 1932, by this viciousness, the beginnings of that uprising was crushed. And the horror of that event, La Matanza, cast a long shadow over El Salvadoran history. In one of his poems, Roque Dalton, whom you heard of before with Mario's presentation, says that we were all born half dead in 1932. We were all born half dead in 1932. And that's Roque Dalton, by the way, the man on the right, one of the great poets of El Salvadoran history. Well, Hernandez Martinez, the dictator you see here, will continue as dictator for the next 12 years. The less said about him, the better, but I thought I would point out that he was a bit of a mystic. So at one time, a smallpox epidemic broke out in one of the towns of El Salvador, and his way of reacting to it was simply to order that the lamps of the town be covered with blue paper in the hopes that maybe that would bring down the spirits of good doctors to cure the people of that town who had smallpox. And I also wanted to point out that this dictator, Hernandez, sided with the US during World War II. And the reason he did that was because Americans continued to be the largest purchasers of Salvadoran coffee. And so he became a US ally, although he himself sympathized with Mussolini during World War II. But he would not accept American troops in El Salvador. And we think the reason for that was he didn't want African Americans being in El Salvador. And so he refused the presence of US troops. But while we're on the topic of World War II in El Salvador, I really would feel remiss if I didn't bring this man up. And the man you see on the screen now is a very different character than this dictator. This is Jose Castellianos Contreras. And he was serving as El Salvador's consul in Geneva during World War II. And in that capacity, at risk to himself, he issued thousands of fake El Salvadoran certificates of citizenship to Jewish families in danger of being murdered during the Holocaust. And in doing so, we think he saved as many as 13,000 people. Contreras was a real hero. And like all real heroes, he always downplayed what he did. He didn't like to talk about it. He always said that anybody would have done the same thing in his position. But anybody who knows anything about history knows that most people don't do the same thing in his condition. And so he deserves to be remembered, as in fact he is all around the world. Well, for the next 40 years, after World War II, most Salvadorans continued to live under the poverty line. Export earnings continued to be predominantly in the form of coffee exports, and those earnings continued to be predominantly congregated in the hands of the few families who ran most of these coffee plantations. 3/4 of the productive land in El Salvador was owned during much of this period by 1/10% of the people in the country. Now, export earnings were fairly high for coffee. And in fact, at one point in the 1970s, El Salvador was the 4th largest producer of coffee in the world. And this in a country just the size of New Jersey. But the coffee elite blocked all efforts at meaningful social reform, land reform, including one last effort in 1980. And by that year, driven by desperation, different leftist groups in El Salvador had combined to form an umbrella organization called the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front. Farabundo Martí was the name of an insurgent in 1932 at the time of La Matanza. That same year, 1980, as the beginnings of a leftist uprising became evident in El Salvador, the country was trembling on the brink of crisis. And at that time, this man, Father Oscar Romero, Archbishop Romero, to give him his full title in 1980, now Saint Oscar Romero, had written a letter to Jimmy Carter asking the United States to cut off supplies and aid to the military junta governing El Salvador on the grounds that the money was simply propping up an unjust social system. He wrote that letter in February of 1980. A month later, on March 24th, 1980, Father Romero had just finished delivering Mass at a small chapel at a hospital in the capital city of San Salvador. And as he was finishing, he was murdered in a hail of gunfire, we think by a right-wing death squad. And a week later, driven by grief in this terrible calamity, tens of thousands of people gathered in San Salvador to commemorate the murder and commemorate the death of Father Romero, a true hero of his people. We think as many as 250,000 people were there for that commemoration. This is not what it looked like then. This is the Metropolitan Church in San Salvador, but this is where they were. Perhaps the largest gathering in the history of El Salvador. And in the midst of the gathering, all of a sudden a bomb went off, and then somebody opened fire. 44 people were killed in the crowd. That was March of 1980. And what followed by 1981 was over a decade of war in El Salvador, in which perhaps 75,000 people died, 95% of them at the hands of the military or the paramilitary death squads in alliance with the military. It's important to point out that the United States government supported the El Salvadoran military in this conflict to the tune, at the height of the conflict, of about $1 million a day. And it was this war in El Salvador that fueled the great Salvadoran immigration to the United States. At the end of the 1970s, there may have been about 50,000 people of Salvadoran ancestry in the United States. By the early 1990s, there were over 500,000 people of Salvadoran ancestry in the United States. A huge increase in so short a length of time. About a quarter of the entire population of El Salvador emigrated during the terrors of the 1980s during this war, and half of those immigrants went to the United States. Many of them went to California. This is MacArthur Park in California. In this neighborhood around MacArthur Park would become a predominantly Salvadoran neighborhood over time. And many of them also went to the Washington, D.C. area. And we here in Boston are the home of the 8th largest Salvadoran community in the United States. And while we're on this slide, I just wanted to point out the statue of Father Romero that is right by MacArthur Park that you can see if you go there, a living enduring memorial to the role of the Salvadoran people in Los Angeles into the heroism of Father Romero. Now, this unprecedented movement of Salvadorans to the United States and out of their country is not hard to understand, because during the war, neither the Salvadoran military nor these death squads made much of an attempt to distinguish members of the FMLN combatants from common people who were non-combatants. In Morazon province, for example, in northeastern El Salvador, we think at least 1,000 people were murdered by the military in one particular incident in late 1981. And over half of those killed were under 18. All Salvadorans remember this as the El Mazote Massacre. There will never be an authoritative number of those who were killed, but the most well-documented recent number is 978, of which 553 were children. Now, that village of Mazote may have been a place where the FMLN, this leftist group that was fighting the government, might have gone from time to time for supplies, but nobody had any evidence at all that this was a village that predominantly supported the efforts of the FMLN. Nevertheless, the massacre occurred. A special detachment of the Salvadoran military trained by the United States committed that massacre. And one of the few survivors, a woman named Rosario Lopez, lost 24 relatives over the course of the days of the El Mazote massacre. Now, at the time, the United States denied that what happened at Mazote was a massacre. And for years, we continued to downplay the extent of civilian deaths for which the government was chiefly responsible in El Salvador. But since we were supporting that government, it was very difficult for Salvadorans fleeing the country to achieve refugee status and thereby achieve legal asylum in the United States. And the reason was that under American law, in order to achieve legal asylum as a refugee, you've got to show that you have a well-founded fear of repression or persecution in your country. So the key words there are well-founded. Now, how could Salvadorans show this when we were supporting the government that was in fact committing the repression? So our version of events in El Salvador was that this was a battleground in the Cold War, where a victory for the FMLN would be a victory, in effect, for the Soviet Union. And here is where those two words, well-founded, two words made the difference for many hundreds of thousands of people. The United Nations definition of a refugee is anybody who fears persecution. But the American definition incorporated those two words, well-founded. And what that meant, that meant that if you were Nicaraguan, fleeing the Sandinistas, you had a well-founded fear of persecution because we were opposed to the Sandinistas. if you were fleeing Castro's Cuba, you had a well-founded fear of persecution from the American standpoint, but not if you were fleeing the much worse violence in El Salvador. And the result was significant numbers of people who made it to the United States from El Salvador were simply classed as economic migrants, not refugees, meaning that many of them, by no means all, but many of them came here as undocumented immigrants subject to deportation. And of those who applied for political asylum in the 1980s, the United States refused 90% of those applications. And so it was that as early as 1982, a movement arose, first in Tucson, Arizona, as a matter of fact, then spreading to 500 churches around the country to house and shield Salvadoran immigrants so that they could not be deported. And Somerville was the home of one of those churches in the 1980s. And that is why Somerville became, in 1987, an official sanctuary city. And we announced specifically in 1987 that we would not cooperate with immigration officials to seek out Salvadoran immigrants in Somerville and deport them. And we proclaimed that, as I said, in 1987. Well, finally, in 1992, a set of peace accords brought the Civil War to an end. The reason was the Cold War had ended by then. Americans had less interest in terms of the government in supporting the El Salvadoran regime in this war to the hilt that we had been supporting them. And also both sides, I think, understood by then that they had achieved a stalemate. Neither side could actually win the war as of the early 90s. But there was also the fact that the same detachment, the same group of soldiers that had killed those villagers in Mazote, in 1989, they were responsible for dragging 6 Jesuit priests out of where they were living at the University of Central America and murdering them along with their housekeeper and their housekeeper's daughter because they had been supporting peace efforts. And there was a great deal of international shock and revulsion over that murder, and that helped drive the government ultimately to the peace table. I would want to point out that 5 of those Jesuit priests who were murdered in 1989 were Spaniards. They came to El Salvador from Spain. And so eventually Spain put one of those responsible on trial, and that man got 133 years in jail because he had committed a war crime. So eventually, 1992, the peace accords were signed. They're called the Chapultepec Peace Accords. In the FMLN, the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front became a regular political party in El Salvador and eventually won national elections in the country in 2009 and 2014. But back to 1992, when those accords, when that treaty was finally signed, the Salvadoran community, which had been growing since the 1980s, began to turn its efforts away from this effort to get a new definition of refugee status and legal asylum to seeking out ways to make sure that undocumented immigrants from El Salvador could stay in the United States. And we've heard from some of our panelists how difficult that effort has been, despite the availability under some circumstances of temporary protected status. That's a fight that's ongoing, and Salvadorans have that in common with other people who are also trying to achieve what we have needed for so long, and that is a sane and better immigration policy. So with that, I thought I would stop, and we've got a very, very distinguished panel here, and I'm sure they would be happy to entertain any questions.
Dan, thank you so much for that lecture. That was Professor Dan Breen. And now we have some time for questions. So does anyone have a question for Professor Breen or for a member of our panel? You can type it in the chat, or I think you could just come on and ask your question. But I have a question to start it off, which is, Kenia, for the parents that you're working with at the Welcome Project, how have their needs changed during the pandemic?
Yeah, so one of the, thank you for the question. I think one of the, which was slightly mentioned from some other panelists, is we have had to be very flexible, right? In all of the ways that we meet needs and the ways that we do outreach. When the pandemic hit, especially early on, it was a lot of loss of income, and which still continues to be a loss of income. It still continues to be a lot of the things that we were facing early on. And so a lot of parents throughout the city of Somerville and throughout Boston, really, and throughout the United States, is what we were seeing as parents were struggling to be at home with their kids and trying to understand what education was going to look like, what remote learning was going to be, but also, you know, and a lot of the things that we knew going in is that access to technology was not a thing. Access to internet was not something that every family had. And so I think for us, or for me specifically, was I was more, I guess, in tune with the Somerville Public Schools and what they were doing and wanting to know how I could help them. And really understanding what they were hearing from parents themselves, right? Because we could, or what I was hearing from the community, right? What parents who maybe were not as connected to the Somerville Public Schools, what we were hearing from them. So there was a lot of that. There was a lot of where are we going to get the food, right? And I know too, I was at home and I was eating all the time. And part of it was the anxiety, part of it was the stress, not knowing what was going to happen the next day. And for a lot of the families, it was the same thing. I have kids, I have newborns, and what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to get milk? Where am I supposed to get bread? Where am I supposed to even find rent and utilities? And so those needs came up very quickly. They came up very quickly. And so the Welcome Project, we worked to establish an immigrant assistance fund to support immigrant families who were facing financial difficulties. And that's still, it's on pause right now, but it's been an ongoing, and we foresee some ramifications and some needs to come up as well as we enter the summer and as we enter the fall. That's really where we're seeing a lot of the needs is for a lot of parents, right? The helping their children, unfortunately, log on to the remote learning was not the top priority. The top priority was making sure that I have a roof over my head and making sure that my children are fed. And so that's where kind of I would come in and I would work with some of the schools of like, okay, what can I do for your children then? For what can I help them understand where is it that you need me to come in and work, right? I don't want you to worry about the things that are so complicated, are in a different language, or in a way that in a computer you've never used before, an application you've never used before. So it was really trying to be strategic and flexible and really making sure that we were listening to what parents were saying they needed, right? I think a lot of people that I was hearing were saying, oh, families need this, families need this. But what we did is we made sure we were asking them, what do you need, right? So a lot of it became more intensely listening of what do you need? How can I help you with? And if it was just someone to talk to, right? Someone to cry over the phone with, just do that. So a lot of our work was it just became very flexible. It was providing that financial assistance, but it was also just making sure that people were okay, that if they needed mental health services, that we were connecting them to mental health services, whether it be themselves or their children, and finding those different resources, and really making sure that we were working again with the Somerville Public Schools in the city and just connecting them with all of the resources that were out there.
Well, thank you so much, Kenia. Well, there's a question for Pastor Morales, if you're still here, about what makes Medford more friendly than Somerville for your church. Pastor Morales, are you still here?
Sharon, he had to drop off.
Oh, he had to drop off. Okay.
Yes.
So, Irma, what did you find most challenging to adjust to when you first came to the United States? And what do you miss the most about El Salvador?
Well, everything. It was a shock. I can't tell you. I don't know how to explain you. It happened probably after 6 months. I was able to talk with my grandmother, because every time I was trying to talk to her, I was crying and crying and crying. So I think it's a really, really big impact personally and the family for my children as well, because but the language, how you can communicate. And I had that experience in the school, because I was unable to communicate with the teacher, and I didn't know about the system, and I have to learn because I want to be part of my children education. So, and most important, I think, immigration status, because you feel like nothing in this country if you don't have immigration status. You're it's just that if you have a work permit, you have the opportunity to get better jobs. And in the meantime, you are getting what the people doesn't want to do if you don't have a social security number or a work permit. So I think it's key. And because my self-esteem was really, really down at that time. I was cleaning houses. I was working in a parking lot in the garden. I was working in a senior. So, and I know I have a lot to give to the community, but I didn't have the opportunity until TPS came. So I think it's many factors. The emotional factor is just, it's hard for families. And that's why I think we need to have empathy with our immigrants communities. And at the same time, I think we underestimate them and see them as a poor people. We please give us the tools. We have the capacity to give something back to this country. So I have been seeing that a lot, and I really appreciate when people take care of our immigrant community, but do it with respect. I think we need to be dignified because we don't want to be like a poor thing. We want dignity, and we come to this country because we don't have any option, you know? So I would say that is most emotional. Immigration status and the language are key. We can work in everything. You listen the poem. So lo sabe lo todo, right? We know everything. So, but I think these three are key. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much, Irma. And Kenia, there's another question for you regarding intergenerational trauma. Is it made harder because many in the United States don't know of the violent recent history of El Salvador?
Yeah, that's a good question. That is part of the problem, but the bigger problem is that it's so difficult for people who migrated here to talk about their own trauma, right? And so I think about it as my mother, and my mother's given me permission to talk about her story, so I share it with her knowledge. She didn't speak to me about the war until I was in high school, or maybe until I was in college, right? Because it's a difficult thing to actually talk about, and to talk to your children and say, whoa, I saw dead bodies in rivers, right? That's not an easy thing to say to a 7-year-old, or to even a 21-year-old. It's not an easy thing to say. And so it's difficult for folks who have done, and not just that, but like, so seeing parts of the war, if they came during the war, if they're in the earthquake, they saw the destruction that the earthquake did, but then also to have to migrate, right? That journey of migration. We don't know what everyone went through during that journey of migration, right? I still don't know everything that my mother went through because she doesn't like talking about it, right? It brings back really bad memories, and it's not an easy conversation to have in general. And we're so good, and maybe I think we're so good at just keeping everything. And what you'll see, I think what was I think the poem, and you'll see in some of the pictures, is we are going to smile, we're going to show you that we're good, and we're going to show you that we're happy, we're going to play music, and it's going to be great, right? We're going to just be in a party together, and that's who we are. Because it's not something also that's made available. Resources haven't been made available to our communities, right? Of like, talk about it. Right. So some of the things that I try to do in our parent English classes is trying to infuse that popular education, like Irma was saying, through storytelling. What does it mean to tell our stories? What does it mean to begin to be able to share who you are and what you've been through in a space that is comfortable, that feels safe to you, right? That's a lot of safety for everyone looks different, and safety for someone who's been through war, who's been through earthquakes, who's been through this migratory trajectory, it looks different for everyone. And so we're trying to find that space that looks safe for everyone, that is considered to be safe for everyone, and then really telling their stories. I think that's probably the bigger issue, is that like telling the stories has not been made an option, and in a way that is respectful, right? In a way that doesn't mean like, oh, like Irma was saying, poor you've been through all of these different things, but note that it also celebrates the resiliency of who we are, of who our people are. And so I think that's maybe more of the basis of how that intergenerational trauma has come. And some of the things that we try to do within the Welcome Project with community members in our English classes, and let's just start by having everyone tell their, like, whatever they're feeling comfortable with of part of their story. Let's start with that, right? Let's just start with the basics. And then if we want to go further, if we hear from folks that they want to be connected to something else, or if they want to be sharing it, then maybe we can help them share it with their children. Maybe we can help break some of those generational things that have been happening. But I think it's the foundation is it's hard to talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kenia. It's very powerful to hear that story. I mean, your own family story and the people that you've been working with. So there's just a comment here that says, thank you for all that these wonderful people contribute to our community. We are blessed and we owe them so much. And someone else says, thank you so much for sharing your personal stories and histories. Irma, I had one more question, which was sort of similar to the question to Kenia, which is what kind of needs have you been seeing during the pandemic? Like, how have things changed over the last year in terms of the work that you're doing in the city?
Yeah, maybe if I can just add, a Salvadorian community, we are so resilient. And I think that is why we don't talk about it. And another thing I want to share is, you mentioned I study international relations, but because the war, I didn't graduate. I have to run every night when they were attacking the university, and we have to just rush. So it was, and you know, I never talk about that because I think it's something makes us vulnerable, and we don't want to be vulnerable. So, but that is the reason I didn't graduate from international relations, because the situation in the university in 1989, it was really, really bad. It was before the final offensive they did on November 1989. So I was supposed to graduate, but I didn't because of that. And I was an immigrant. I'm an immigrant twice. In 1981, we went to Costa Rica because of the Civil War as well. So it has been a lot of issues. And I think it's not just me, it's thousands of people who have been having those situations, and we don't talk about that. Related to the needs in Somerville, I think something I try to do is to give the opportunities people to talk about what they want, what they need, and how we can support. So basically, I think for the city was more like a rental assistance, food. The schools were in charge of the technology, access to technology. So, but I hear a really bad or sad stories, what the people has been going through since the pandemic started. Like the first call I got, positive COVID. Even for me, it was shocking because I don't know what to say to the people. I don't know what to do. So, but after a year, I think we have been establishing some step we need to follow in order to provide the needs they are requesting. Just as an individual working with the Latino community, I can tell you I serve 250 families. Now, I got support, and now we are doing a follow-up, calling each family. Do you get food? Do you get? So we are asking everything. If they need help with the vaccine, we are providing that, but we are calling one by one all the database we have, so making sure they have access to the services if they need, or if they need anything else. So what I'm concerned is what will happen after post-pandemic. I think we as a city, we need to establish some kind of resources in order to provide, because people who got sick, they have been unable to go back to work, or they just lost the job. So what will happen with those families after pandemic? So I'm trying to be really strong about, we need to put in something in place post-pandemic in order to serve and provide for these families. So we'll see what happens, but I can tell you the needs are there, and we have been trying to do the best we can in order to provide for families. But even though before the pandemic, the family situation was bad already. So now with this, it's just double, but we have been trying to provide the services.
Thank you so much, Irma. And we had a couple more comments. One person says, amazing. Thank you for your strength and resilience. And another one says, Somerville is fortunate to have such a strong, active Salvadoran community. And that's from recently retired State Representative Denise Provo. And the president of the museum's board says, thank you all so much for participating in this tonight. You've really opened my eyes to the particular El Salvadoran experience. So, we really want to thank our panelists. This event is also going to become part of the Somerville Museum's archives. So a way of preserving your stories for the history of the city. We're so thankful that you joined us here tonight. We're just so pleased that the Somerville Museum could present your voices. And to everyone who's joining us through the Somerville Media Center and Somerville City Cable, and for people here tonight, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We're really grateful, and we hope to see you sometime soon at the Somerville Museum. So thank you to Professor Dan Breen. Thank you our entire panel, Mario Quiroz, Kenia Alfaro, Pastor Luis Morales, and Irma Flores. We're so grateful for you coming. Thank you for sharing your voices with us tonight.